since you mentioned, Flora, that you have a headache, well, I think this would be a perfect time to share a little bit of osteopathic treatment on your scalp. Wow, as promised, you teach me a little bit about the Nyasa tradition. I'm sorry, Flora. I wanted to give you back. You left some pictures of Livingstonian. The ones of Ida Chilembwe when she was promoting independence and education for women here in Nyasaland, and yourself, Dr. Malekebu, your sister Ruth. Of course, John Chilembwe before he died trying to free Nyasaland from the British. They spelled my name wrong, of course, Dr. Jones Leibowitz, and I think they left out the doctor also, which tends to happen with women, but they keep calling me nurse. Anyway, I know it's been a rough year for you, and since coming over to Africa to the Scottish mission a few months ago, myself, and not being Scottish, being an American at the mission, and not being exactly of the same ethnicity either, well, and then our talk at Livingstonia, I've been thinking a great deal about what you said. You see, as an American, I'm partial to independence against the British myself. Of course, with our history, we celebrate escaping from the British Empire, well, every single year, so I certainly feel some sympathy to Pastor Chilembwe and his cause to free your country from the British. Now, I understand that that didn't go well, and that everyone is afraid of you because of your association with him, and that you just barely managed to get back into Nyasaland after achieving your medical degree in the United States, Dr. Malekebu. And I know being stuck a year essentially in quarantine must have been very difficult for you as well, Flora. Yes, quarantine just sounds so difficult. So, I understand that you intend to work through slightly different means, more focused on changing culture through better health, education, and faith. I understand that your faith is very important to you, but based on our conversation last time, it does seem to me that you see freedom as a natural consequence of this faith. And so to me that leads naturally to revolution by culture, which, yes. So, the headache thing, I'm so sorry. Yes, the new headache treatment for you, Miss Flora. I'm so sorry. Let me show you. So, I don't know if you've heard of osteopathy or osteopathic lesions, but essentially there's a belief among some doctors in the United States. This was something that started just after the Civil War, sort of in reaction to the bad effects of medicines that people experienced. Obviously, people experienced... I'm so sorry, I touched your head without asking for permission. Am I alright? I am so sorry, that is incredibly rude. I will not... You did ask me to... Yeah, okay. Thank you. Even though you asked me to help you with the headache, I should have said something first. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. So, an osteopathic lesion is a small misalignment of the fascia, bone, muscle that can cause pain and discomfort, as when the occipital and frontal muscles tighten up and cause a tension headache. And the thought is that there are certain trigger points, that there are certain places on the scalp where you can stimulate realignment and improvement of these osteopathic lesions. Let us have lunch, and then we will continue with what we are doing. Does that sound good? Excellent. Alright, I'm going to go over, and I think Dr. Malekebu was already starting to prepare some fish. Excellent. as I was saying, this is something that developed shortly after the Civil War in the United States in response to how negatively Civil War medications worked. The founder, Dr. A.T. Still, was so against medications, he believed no one should use any at all. People in the Civil War were using medications like mercury, cocaine, some of which we still use today, but which do have very aggressive side effects. So, mercury especially. And he saw this and he thought there was a better way. And he thought he could heal anything with osteopathic manipulation. I don't think that's the case. But so, one thing the British do have going for them is their medical journals always reporting on and remaining open to medicine throughout the world. In the British Medical Journal, or not always, but so with osteopathy in 1903, they wrote an article about osteopathy, which was actually quite positive. Americans had recently blocked the practice of osteopathy in, I think, Pennsylvania. So this is some 20-something years ago, of course, right? The time of our parents. So the Americans had essentially allowed, people were trying to see government recognition, and they knocked that down. They said no. Well, the British article lists several case studies of different ways that osteopathy seems to have been useful for various patients, and then concludes that, it might be something useful to consider trying. So, they didn't have any aggressive opinion. But then, in 1910, there's a more interesting analysis where they talk about physicians like Dr. Bryce going to study among the osteopaths and bringing back information that could be useful to evaluate. Oh, that's all lovely. Let me drop there. These are beautiful. I like them very much. They look great on you. Miss Flora. I suppose Dr. Malekebu was going to take a nap now. Yes, so the 1910 article in the British Medical Journal. I love to talk. I'm sorry. I am a very talky person. So, the 1910 article does not accept osteopathy wholeheartedly, like the 1903 piece, but it points out that we can learn a lot from different forms of research. It points out that even though we don't use homeopathy because it is ineffective, the work of homeopathy has caused mainstream medicine to realize that many patients get better without the large doses of medications that we provide, and that in fact our very aggressive medications sometimes make patients worse. Oh. It seems something's knocking the rocks over behind you. Some very aggressive little waves. Yes. No, I'll continue. I'll absolutely continue. So, the 1910 piece was rightfully critical of osteopathic schools where there were no full-time teachers. They very aggressively marketed, saying that what they could do, they were over-promising. They were promising that you would be able to get so much money as an osteopath and that all your patients would be cured. And in some ways they were very scammy, or are. I actually don't know about now. I didn't go to an osteopathic school. I learned some osteopathy through working with some osteopaths, which, because of the conflict between osteopaths and allopathic physicians, let me tell you, that was a bully. That was a bully. No, doll, you're perfect right there, and you look beautiful as well. You always look good. So, I like the 1910 piece, really, because it's very reasonable to my eye. I take it upon myself to learn as much as I can from as many sources. I keep the good and throw out the bad, and that's essentially what they're advocating. They're saying osteopathy itself may have some problems, but we cannot ignore it, because if it could help someone, even one person, then we need to understand how. So they were encouraging further research into it. And some of us even have a saying at this time in the United because it will look like we're trying to cover something up. It is unwise in medicine to silence anybody, and instead better to shed light on their arguments and demonstrate scientifically why they are wrong, not silence them. Use of the law also always implies the government's monopoly on violence. Using violence is not a way to solve problems, in my opinion. And so in my opinion, when you enlist, exactly, but many physicians are wanting to protect, in the United States with this conflict right now, here in the late 20s, many physicians are trying to protect their turf, essentially, and make sure they can earn more. So some physicians, I do believe, do have a honest concern for the patient, but the American Medical Association is a complete scam. Complete scam. You know, there are many treatments that mainstream physicians were using in Civil War that we no longer use, whereas osteopathy is still used today, because many less side effects. It's sort of like a mix between chiropractic and massage. So, now that said, current debates in Britain, I hear, through the grapevine, are mostly problems with osteopaths who renounce all drugs, declaring a drugless medicine. I'm whispering because I don't want to offend the other good doctor. I'm not sure his position on osteopathy. I suspect he probably considers it to be hogwash. Hogwash is a term I learned from one of my friends who stayed in the South for a little while. That's not really how we work. My dear, you have a little bit of schmutz on your face here. There we go. So, people are uncomfortable with osteopathy right now, and on both sides of the ocean, people are wondering how you will register physicians. Is osteopathy, like a radiology technician, or is it like a physician? Now, of course, the latest gospel I've heard is that the folks who write for the British Medical Journal these days are increasingly anti-osteopathy, and they talk down about this American invention. They usually use American as an insult. They've been doing it for centuries, similarly to how they do with other colonies and former colonies under their rule. Any criticism they have for the United States, though, is usually something that was a result of their colonial actions. Anything negative that people of European descent have done in the United States in general was from descendants of Great Britain, or from following the example that Britain set. So, Britain complaining about the United States is a little bit similar to a lady of the night complaining that her daughter also walks the street corners. I am talking a great deal. So, I wouldn't be surprised if by 1935 they published something quite opinionated. I've heard that by that time they're hoping to eliminate the osteopaths. I understand they're going to publish without any case studies, just very opinionated about this American invention. They also feel that osteopaths are trying to create a monopoly on medicine, which is strange because that is what they are literally trying to do. They believe this because many osteopaths are not very willing to teach osteopathy to MDs unless they've gone to an osteopath school. It seems to me that both sides are more interested in their own power than in the needs of the patient. But that's just my opinion. I'm quite glad to not be in the United States right now. So, speaking of which, you were going to tell me a little bit about Malawian medicine. Yes. I understand your husband went to an American mainstream medical school and is the first Malawian physician. However, I understand that before this, there has been some herbal medicine background. I understand also there have been positives and negatives. some of it being more cultural, like the alteration of female, yes, on children, which we all disagree with, the three of us, obviously. So I understand there's some of that is more cultural, not medicine. But there's also an herbal section, which I would love to learn about. I think our perspective, sometimes we only see the abuses or the bad things, and we never get to learn the beauties of some of these traditional ways. So we have mankwala, which is medicines, and then you mentioned, I think, angata or something like that. So mankwala is medicines. Oh, asinganga, yes, and that is in Chewa. Your husband is Yao from here, right, Dr. Malekebu? But you are not from here, so how has that been, learning the languages here? I see. So everybody, you're saying, knows herbs in Nyasaland. So euphorbia heard is used for the latex. The latex of it is used for a child suffering from what? Over conjunctivitis. I should write this down. I should write this down while you're teaching me. Oh, things are falling on me. And you said a man who notices white pus in his urine may suspect chisono, which is like a non-specific urethritis, I see. And so he might go into the woodland to dig up the roots of the nwakale. Scientific name? What was that? Holarina pubescens. What a strange name. So you will wash a boil in water. And drink the infusion, I see. An headache. Aromatic leaves of mungabwe. You're going quite fast. Osinum ganum, I see. And inhaling the vapor while general stomach ailments. I see. Or menstrual pains. Can be dealt with by drinking Dicrostachys cinerea. There's a lot of folk knowledge among normal people here. But if they need more than that, they'll go to a singanga. And then when it's worse, people will go to somebody like your husband, an allopathic physician like myself. So, 3 types of asinganga. So the village herbalist, the market herbalist, and the doctor diviner. The diviner is obviously the one that you and your husband cannot practice, and myself either, because of the books that we follow. The Muslims would call us both people of the book, you know. Yes. So, I see. And so the diviners tend to be men. So those are the ones who are speaking to beings that you and I cannot speak to. Does it ever work? You don't believe that it does. But you do believe the herbs work. Some of them. I see. So men and women can be asinganga that don't practice divination. I would have to talk to your husband, since he was from you. Do you think he has a moment? Oh, Dr. Malekebu, I'd like to hear a little more about some of the Malawian. Oh, what is it like being an asinganga, for example? I see. They might go into the bush with a hoe. How do you say hoe in Chewa? I guess I'm asking. Kasu. A penny or an axe? What's axe? Nwangwa. Asanganga are often usually birth attendants, I see. And they usually deal with women and children, but men can deal with both. That's a bit unfortunate, I think. I've seen that kind of sign, yes. Asinganga wa azimaya ndizina. A healer for mothers and children, yes. I see. Oh, people use animal skins. Oh my. Well, I don't think the serval is kosher. I see. Snake skins. Well, if it works for people, great quantities of plant material, freshly gathered leaves. This is true. Many Europeans and Americans like myself come in thinking of this esoteric magic that the quote-unquote natives might possess. We tend to have a very noble, savage view of things, where, with a great deal of ignorance, I will admit. I have seen other missionaries. Think kind of the same way, skin color notwithstanding. Yes. So, despite the way we see things, the reality is many of these herbs do have therapeutic value, you say. How fascinating. And some market herbalists don't sell the animal parts and skins of snakes and stuff, only the bottles containing bark or root infusions. Oh, fascinating. Oh, I see. So the owl and hyena are associated with what you call witchcraft. I see. Ufiti. I see. I see. What do you mean by that? So many complaints of herbs are considered natural. That is quite strange. But for initial stages, you don't look for causes or anything. There's just quick remedies. I see. That is a different philosophy on illness. And people look at social factors that may have caused it. I see. Like social tensions, adultery, ufiti, and then a diviner will check over those things. Now, being a devil's advocate, I know that we as Western physicians, although, since you are from Nyasaland yourself, I imagine you have a closer feeling with the people here and the traditions here than other black missionaries who study the United States. But being a devil's advocate, despite our education in your direction, in some ways it's true. For example, adultery can cause a urethritis because you can obtain a sexually transmitted disease, correct? I'm whispering so as not to offend Miss Flora with the language of such intimate and disgusting things. Not that the people themselves are disgusting. There's always love for the patients, but no one likes a good urethritis. But you and I couldn't do divining for it. I would look into the Torah, for example, to see that the rule is no adultery and that there are health consequences for all things. Then you would read the same book, same way. So that changes things somewhat, that you already have the rules to follow, and it's less divination to figure something out. This is fascinating. Oh, people also sell good luck charms, I see, to And now we're leaning more into the, what was it, Ufiti side, I see. And that's what you yourself don't appreciate, because of what your sister went through as well, I imagine. Yes. Where your parents didn't want her to choose her own belief, understandably. I think parents become uncomfortable with that kind of thing. But the reason they didn't want her to is because they wanted to perform a ceremony on her female parts and then marry her to a 45-year-old when she was 8. I remember you telling me that story. Yes. So those kind of cultural practices, or like the cultural practices of burning the arms of a pregnant woman who is having twins, or different cultural practices that are associated with health, and or like a mother always being the last one to see a baby when it is passed away, in some ways torturing her, because the idea is if it's sick, she is dispensable. So I completely understand your perspective, having seen what you've seen, that there are certain kinds of medicine you would like to eliminate while you are coming here with your knowledge. So I understand that. And both village and market herbalists tend to agree with you. There is this conflict in the culture already. They're unhappy with Ufiti and Masenga, and emphasize on treating it through herbal medicines rather than ascertaining his cause or divination. So in other words, somebody has cast a spell or something on you, and you take an herb to prevent the effect. I see. I don't think that's forbidden in my dorm. I don't know. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And it's not a shaman. Yes. There's a difference between an herbalist, a diviner, a shaman. I understand. That is quite fascinating. I hope that these herbal practices continue to be used for many, many years, really. Yes. Absolutely. Did you see this thing that I made over here? I've just been playing around with leaves and so forth. Yes, of course. I just feel like I've become like such a child playing here by the water. Do you like the sound of the water? I certainly do. Ah, yes. I'll put my notes away for the time being. I did think Flora wanted to come back and continue having her head looked at. Is that the case? I see. Yes, let's do that then. I will put this away. I also have a wonderful book that I've been reading here that I have deeply enjoyed. I love being by the water. It's so wonderful. Oh yes, Miss Flora. Well, as I've said, Americans generally find ourselves at odds with the British these days. Europe in general seems an odd state, what with the rumors from Germany, and then Britain trying to appease Germany, and some of the people in the Jewish community are becoming a little bit concerned. So, but when it comes to medicine, now the Americans are quite similar to the British. Now, as I mentioned before, the British were a little more open and tolerant about 20 years ago. But currently, the American Medical Association, like the British Medical Journal, is quite eager to squash any possible competition financially. And I've seen reprints of negative British opinions in the Journal of American Medical Association. So, and I had a friend whose father, back in 1913, a Dr. Gleason, even once he was punished by the Attorney General for practicing mainstream medicine and osteopathy at the same time, even though that is what he had been taught in medical school. Because the osteopaths actually want their patients to get better. So modern osteopaths are not like 80s still who use no medicine. Modern osteopaths use mainstream medicine and do all of the things that an MD like myself would do. They use the same textbooks as well. But despite that, essentially disbarred or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how one would say that, but he was delicensed. So his argument was that the language in Kansas's Medical Practice Act literally authorized surgery, and it did. It literally authorizes surgery. They argued that when it came to osteopathy, surgery just meant, the manipulation of the fascia, nerves, vessels, those kind of things. The osteopathy, which is ridiculous. People will do almost everything and twist words in any which way in order to protect them. Oh no, as I said myself, I am not an osteopath. I was trained allopathically in the mainstream. Just a little before me, cocaine, electrostimulation, and all that. So, I have, however, learned from some osteopaths and do suspect their further advancement and research. Who knows? Perhaps in 50, 100 years, cocaine and radium will not be something we use anymore, while osteopathy might. Who knows? Or perhaps, with enough research, they will fade out of existence. But are you noticing that your headache feels better? Yes. Oh yes, in the United States, we've only recently just decreased the use of the home battery, where family members can electrocute themselves for their health. Doctors' offices are still using electricity in wildly varying manners. Now, you're also at a crossroads between different kinds of medicine in some ways, but much earlier. Because, like your husband, you have the allopathic medicine that he is bringing to his people to try to heal them. At the same time, you have some of this traditional medicine. So, I remember you mentioned the nurse, Miss Delaney, the first woman of African descent to come as a Christian missionary to Nyasa land, or maybe to the whole continent. This is fascinating. I hadn't considered that. I'm not very familiar with... I'm familiar with Harlem. Yes, and the Harlem Renaissance, of course. But... And of course she was fighting against mutilation procedures on young girls. So how do you feel as these two different kinds of medicine are coming together? Do you think people will be able to choose the best from both of them? What do you think about Yao medicine being banned? I see. Or if they banned the foreign medicine you bring in from the United States and kept traditional medicine. Of course, this won't happen under British rule, but I see. I, too, am for as much open exchange as possible. I do believe there is a line when we involve treatments that don't have consent, where the person isn't fully informed on risks and so forth, and especially when the well-being of children or people who cannot consent, unconscious people, so forth. So obviously I would ban the permanent mutilation because it doesn't have a proven life or limb-saving medical purpose, only a cultural, emotional use. Yes. I will tell you. Yes, exactly. Even if Ruth Malekebu as a child had consented to the traumatic mutilation procedure or the marriage, one couldn't prove that she was not manipulated at 8 years old. She's not really old enough for informed consent. Of course, there are those culturally who argue that her life will be marred if her body's not modified like others, but what you can't unmodify, you can always modify later. No, I believe there is a significant difference. Obviously, as a Jewish person, I do support male circumcision at infancy. Because there is a belief that there is less transmission of sexually transmitted diseases with circumcision. It may be that information changes. It may be that the information and studies done on it are not very well controlled because it's difficult to compare populations. They need to compare populations that are in the same region, not populations across the world you can't control. Compare STD rates, for example, venereal diseases in the United States New England, for example, to here in Nyasa land. All of people here circumcise at 8. So I suppose Nyasa land is not a good example. In some other country that does not have this form of medicine, you can't make the comparison. So I understand that. But there isn't any argument for betterment for young girls. It is complicated. These things are very controversial. It does make sense to me also to ban procedures that certainly end in death, or even almost certainly with no life-saving benefit. And there are those gynecological procedures, of course, that can only cause long-term harm, even if requested by the patient, if performed when there's no medical evidence of illness or any other process foreign to the natural functioning of the organs. So I'm not very much in support of. I think even if something is requested by the patient, if it is certainly not going to fix a biological problem, it is complicated. It is complicated. I would love to hear Malawian folk tales. What do you mean by Malawi? Oh, the Malawi people were the first people in this area. Before then, the Yao and Jiwa and so forth. I see. This area that the British have called Nyasa land. I see you have it written down. This is fascinating. What does it mean? Oh, I'll gladly read it. So Mr. Rabbit and Mr. Grasshopper. Once there were two people. Their names were Mr. Rabbit and Mr. Grasshopper. One day they wanted to buy cloth at Quilimani, and after they arrived at Quilimani, they both brought cloth. Mr. Grasshopper purchased a very beautiful piece of cloth, but Mr. Rabbit bought a piece of cloth that was less beautiful, and Mr. Rabbit was unhappy. On their way home, Mr. Rabbit killed Mr. Grasshopper. Oh! Because of Mr. Grasshopper's beautiful cloth. He took him and burned him in the fire, but it happened that his blood was transformed onto a leaf, fell onto a leaf, and was transformed into a bird. When Mr. Rabbit went to sleep, the bird started to sing a song over and over again. He has killed Mr. Grasshopper because of Mr. Grasshopper's beautiful cloth. I see. Now Mr. Rabbit was able to catch this bird, and he killed it as well. I have never heard of such an aggressive rabbit. We'll do a little more scalp attention here. And when Mr. Rabbit arrived at the village after he had killed the bird, more blood was spilled, and that turned into another bird that he had to kill. I see. I should be writing this down also. And then the villagers asked, where is Mr. Grasshopper? Well, you do have it written here, I suppose. I almost want to copy it over for my own uses. And then the people caught Mr. Rabbit and killed him. Oh my goodness. I think the moral of the story is don't covet. Don't want somebody else's thing, because no matter how much you try to cover up the crime, at some point it will speak to you. I do find the bird in the blood to be quite reasonable, actually. Very allegorical, because it's true. It is blood at crime scenes that tells the detectives what they should be looking for, isn't it? It is like a bird that sings of who's guilty. What's the next one? One day in Africa, there was a lion which went to the plains, and he found a zebra. And this lion, he caught the zebra. And the other zebra said, when the lion comes next time, let us place our feet together and kick. So the lion came waiting again, and they placed their feet together to kick. But they did not succeed in killing the lion. So then they said, came, this time they placed their heads together and they kicked and killed the lion. This is, of course, another good and very interesting folktale. I like it. I like that very much. What a beautiful... it makes sense to me. That's the thing I think many people fail to understand, and something I have loved about being here in Nyasaland, where I feel honestly a little bit freer than in the United States, especially when it comes to clothing. Now, of course, in the United States, the flapper movement is growing, but female professionals like myself cannot really participate in it. We are expected to dress almost as if we were matrons from many years ago, because a woman who is too beautiful obviously can't be intelligent. But I like these kind of stories because I think they show you what intelligence, the importance of intelligence and teamwork. Even though they worked together at first to kick, they weren't coordinated. I think that is a very good, I think it's a good nuanced little lesson to teach. I like it. Ooh, I would love to hear lyrics for some military songs. That sounds right up my alley. I do have more questions about the, I especially have questions about the African soldiers that the British took for the Great War. Yes, the Great World War. I understand that Mr. Laws talked about that because it seems after the Great War, the African soldiers that had been recruited or in some ways drafted to work for the British during that war, many of them were just dropped afterwards. That is what I was told. And Mr. Laws, that's the missionary, I can't remember if he's Scottish or not, but that's one of the missionaries who's directly involved in the British government. It's interesting in sort of a passive resistance capacity. I think his exact words were that, let's see, it was back in about 1917. It was over 10 years ago. But he spoke that the subject would be an extremely awkward one for the government to answer if it came out how all of these veterans, all of these soldiers were dying of dysentery, chronic ulcers, hunger, things that the British could provide, especially since they had taken these people and made them work. So, yes, Mr. Laws, I understand he established over 700 schools and industry centers. Very important for him to advance industry and work in Nyasaland and Africa. Yes. That is interesting, Doctor, and something that I will write down. We talked about Thangata before, about how the British co-opted this thing. Thangata originally meant, was it helping your neighbor for free with their fields? And the British co-opted that and made it, you who are living on this land that used to be yours, or that you were displaced because we displaced you over to here, you must pay rent by working for free for your British neighbor. More of a forced situation. I remember you telling me about that. Do you think people are willing to accept systems like Thangata? Because everyone did not help Don Chilemwe during his revolt. Why did his revolt fail? You would think with numbers and with all the well-trained African soldiers who had previously worked for the British, and many continue to work for them, do you think there is a mindset of imprisonment to chiefly control and then given over to imperial control? You've mentioned that before, how this system of obedience was initially obedience always to a chieftain, who had the final say. And when the British came and began pulling those chieftains in underneath them, yes, that's right, you mentioned that essentially that control transferred to the British. And then people end up accepting the rule that So you say yours and Pastor Chilembwe's strong beliefs in freedom started with spiritual freedom and then bled over into mental and physical freedom and ultimately civil rights. So we start with the heart. That is why these songs are important, because there's rebellion through songs. Some of the songs that the soldiers sung, not Civil War, I'm sorry, in the Great War, some of the songs that the soldiers sung, I say, it's called Asilikali, right? Sole, 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 sole. On this journey I did not know that I could die in the war. There's sorrow in war. Sole, 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 sole. So at first, there were positive songs, and then there were sadder songs. Sole means sorry. It sounds like the British word sorry and how they speak. Sole. Ah, yes. That is how they speak. So when their prospects brightened at the end of the war, they instead began to sing of the joy of leaving Burma alive and their Lake Nyasa land, the country of Nasa land, to which they could return. It's interesting how they began to accept this collective designation, even though it was so many different people groups that the English drew lines around to cover congeries of tribes from the Lake Nyasa and Lower Zambezi region. So during the first half-century, Yao soldiers, like from your people group, were the favored British recruits, I see, for the King's African Rifles. But then later, Ngani soldiers brought with them Ngoma lyrics, and they became fused into the Asikali tradition of the Yao. So you now have different people groups forced together by a circumstance, beginning to unite culturally. And the Ngoma songs tended to be more political. Oh, as did the one heard when the First World War began, protesting the punishment meted out to Ngoni Parliament Chief Jim Dongajere for declining to support World War I recruitment. Because of how the system worked, our chieftains were essentially incorporated into... yes. But they had to obey the British. Inkosi Jim Dongajere, he has been publicly humiliated. The chief of the land, we publicly denounce it. The desecration of the land, we publicly denounce it. So this is where song begins to be rebellion. I see. So your hope is through medicine, like these singers through song, to bring the spirit of freedom into the hearts of the people that you're around. Because if you all are, as people groups, able to mobilize together, you can end colonial rule, maybe even peacefully. I see. Tiende Pamodzi is another song. This is being used, but not very often yet, I see. And it's something to sing to encourage revolutionary leaders, I see. Ziko Lanyase land. Let's march. Well, let's march. And of course the line was an important symbol for the King's African Rifle. So, but they start with inspirational lyrics, of course. Haya Karaskari, our duty is the journey. What is your job at be fighting today? Orders of the government. The King's African Rifles are ready. As fierce as lions, all of us are brave. Come, let's go and fight. Fight the enemy, fight him hard. Haya Karaskari. I see. The Nyasas are the lions, the Nyasas are the lions of the Europeans. And I see how you want to change that mindset. And that's difficult. Because they had the options between abject poverty. This is what I remember you telling me from, correct me if I'm wrong, but from Miss Delaney, the nurse who essentially raised you, that between the oppression of traditional systems that are very controlling of women and very unhealthy for men. They're trapped between that and the new technologies and opportunities the British offer, but for the price of British control of your life. Yes. I see during the first. Yes. I see. This is my first time hearing any of these. So the Great War, they sang they wanted to get some fire, and later new songs were after where Nyasa land is fire. Nyasa land is fire, fire, Germans, nothing. I think these practices of music are fascinating, and I appreciate you sharing them with me. I wish you the best I feel caught by the spirit that you have shared with me, and I understand that at the mission we cannot talk freely like this. You may have confidence in me despite the fact that I am ignorant of many things. It has been quite a journey here in Nyasa land. I think my next journey might take me to New Zealand. I have just decided, with the current tensions in Europe and the United States, I just think I might travel for health in other countries. It depends. Sometimes, because of poverty, people are more willing to accept a female physician because they don't have other options. Sometimes they won't. I certainly have experienced that, where men are uncomfortable with that concept here as well. But I think there I feel more restricted. But there is a lot of growing freedom, a lot of changes in music and so forth. And of course, here the freedom I have is only because of advantages I have as a foreigner and with my education. If I were born here, I would not have that freedom. I would be subject to the British and traditional systems. So there are advantages sometimes to being a foreigner. Yes. I have talked your ear off. Miss Flora, how is your headache? I hope that as all of our medical systems begin to evolve, osteopathy, allopathy, asinganga, and mainstream medications, I do hope that we will be wise and generous about what things we ban, and in general, if things don't cause harm, I do hope that we will be open about letting them occur. And when things cause obvious harm to a child or are non-medical procedures without a good medical basis, I hope we won't do them, but who knows? It's all about protecting the patient. Oh, I couldn't imagine something like that, of course. Well, I think I'm about to take a nap. What about you? Thank you, Miss Flora. I do wish you a wonderful evening. I think you will have a good evening. Yes. I think so. I just love looking down at these poems that you have shown me and the water. It's all quite lovely. These are exciting times around the world. I think those who don't travel tend to see only a narrow piece of the world, like the music of the 1920s. And we don't think about a 1920s Malawi, or Yao, or Jewa, under British control here in Nyasa land. I see they named it just after the lake. There was no thought of the people. You wouldn't keep this name, Nyasa land. What would you call it? It would be difficult to name it after any one people group now. since the Malawi were here first. Malawi, perhaps. Well, I really believe one day things will change and Great Britain will have to relinquish its territories. I believe that. In the meantime, anything that I can do, even if it's just very small, let me know. I think medicine is so practical because you help people, and then you have the opportunity to speak and advise and demonstrate to people that there are other options. That's why they're so afraid of you as an educated black man. They're deadly afraid of an educated black man. I've seen them say it. I've overheard it as well. So in some ways the most powerful force is simply being you and not dying so that other people can see that there are options. Lynchburg, Virginia, I shall have to visit when I go back and see the school that you went to. I don't really go down south very much. Well, I'll let you both rest. I shall retire over to my area and perhaps take a small nap myself. I thank you